Welcome to Blue Fire's podcast, where we entertain you with tales of famous people you've never heard of. Each week, Steve, Lottie or Linda will guide you through the centuries to shine the spotlight once again on entertainers that history has forgotten. Join us for drama, interviews and the occasional chat over a bottle of wine as we discover that the topics of plague, poverty and overnight stardom are not unique to the 21st century. Today's episode is all about Marie Lloyd, the Queen of Music Hall. And to be sure to celebrate this pint-sized powerhouse properly, we're going to introduce you later to two very special guests. But first, who was Marie Lloyd? Well, Matilda Alice Victoria Wood was born on the 12th of February 1870 in Hoxton, London, the eldest of 9 children. Her father was an artificial flower maker who also worked as a waiter at the famous Eagle Tavern Music Hall in Islington, and it was at the Eagle that Marie made her solo debut at the age of 15. Before this, though, she'd formed a singing troupe called the Fairy Bells with her younger sisters, and they entertained in missions and doss houses in the East End of London, performing temperance songs about the dangers of alcohol. Marie's Eagle Tavern debut was under the stage name Bella Della Mare. She was no shrinking violet and had no scruples about using other artists' songs to advance her career. She purloined the song In Those Good Old Days from Jessie Acton, and one of her most famous songs, The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery, from Nellie Power. This was much more serious than just performing a cover version of a song is today. A successful song could mean weeks of bookings for a singer, and they guarded their own songs jealously. The Nellie Power song shot Marie to stratospheric fame almost immediately. When she performed it, she strategically positioned her brother John in the balcony of the theatre, with instructions to wave his handkerchief at the appropriate time for dramatic effect, thereby making her version the most memorable. And it wasn't long before she changed her name to something more memorable too. Marie, of course, rhymes with starry, and Lloyd was already familiar to the public, being on matchboxes, soap, newspapers, and various other consumer products. Marie had a good eye for marketing and publicity, would likely have made the most of social media if she were around today. As well as her music hall turn, Marie performed in pantomimes in her career, including at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. This gave her a guaranteed good level of income for several weeks. At the height of her career, Marie Lloyd was the best paid performer in the country, earning some £11,000 a year. Fortune in those days. Her domestic life, sadly, was not as successful as her career. Having fallen pregnant at the age of 17, she married Percy Courtney, a ticket tout. The marriage wasn't happy, and Marie went back to work as soon as she could after having her baby, Marie Jr., and became the main breadwinner. Percy was a violent drunk and resentful of his dependency on his wife. He was the cause of several ugly scenes backstage at various theatres and eventually sued Marie for divorce when she began an affair with the singer Alec Hurley. Alec was a support turn to Marie both in the UK and on a tour of the USA. He too resented Marie's star status and felt that his career was being sidelined by her, and he turned to drink. Marie then began an affair with the jockey Bernard Dillon, with whom she lived as Mrs. Dillon. Hurley, who by all accounts was a jolly decent chap, began divorce proceedings, but he died before this could be finalised. Dillon and Marie, in the meantime, had been refused entry to America because they were travelling as husband and wife without being married. He was charged under the White Slave Act, and Marie was charged with being a passive agent. Subsequently, they were granted entry on condition that they lived apart, and they officially married in Portland, Oregon. But Marie also suffered physical violence at the hands of Dillon, and in 1920 they were divorced. Marie toured nationally, she toured worldwide with great success in Paris and not such a warm welcome in America. At heart, Marie and her act belonged to London. Due to the risque nature of that act, she was not invited to perform at the first ever Royal Command performance. Although deeply wounded by the snub, Miss Lloyd was not one to take such insults lying down, declaring, Every one of my performances is a command performance by order of the British public. She rented the London Pavilion Theatre for a night, same night as the Royal Command performance, of course, and played to a sold-out audience. In 1919, she first sang what's possibly her most enduring and recognisable song, Don't Dilly Dally on the Way. But she was snubbed again by the Royal Command Performance Committee, and her physical and mental health were in decline, as were her finances. Despite earning a comparative fortune, Marie had been overly generous to her family and friends and always lived beyond her means. By 1920, her finances and health were declining in equal measure, and by 1922, she'd moved in with her sister in order to save money. It was during this time that she collapsed on stage, whilst singing I'm one of the ruins that Cromwell knocked about a bit, which was to the amusement of the audience, who thought it was all part of the act. It was far from a funny episode, but Marie was determined to keep working. The following week, she was found in severe pain in her dressing room at the Alhambra Theatre. She died of kidney and heart failure 3 days later at the age of 52. Marie Lloyd's funeral was attended by at least 40 and probably closer to 100,000 people, and the floral tributes took 4 hours to unload. But Marie herself had died penniless. Shortly after the funeral, the author T.S. Eliot wrote, among the small number of music hall performers whose names are familiar to what is called the lower class, Marie Lloyd had far the strongest hold on popular affection. To discover more about the woman behind the legend, we chatted last year to Marie Kelly, the actress who has played Marie several times, and the writer Midge Gillies, author of the definitive biography, Marie Lloyd, the one and only.
Name's Marie Lloyd from now on. I'll be singing a couple of songs tonight.
Well, I came over from Ireland with a theatre company in 1986, and we played in the Old Vic, so one could say I started at the top and I'm working my way down. So I've worked in theatre in London and on the continent, all around the country, radio, television, and I played the Irish harp. And the interest in Marie Lloyd came because of Catapult's theatre company, which we started through the Kent branch of Equity. A group of us got together and we thought, we're all working in Kent. Let's do something within Kent. And this was about our 4th production on the halls, because we decided, and Lindsay Wickens and I were looking at various material that we could use for different shows, because we like to produce new work all the time. So we were looking at Marie Lloyd, and Tilly kept coming up all the time. So we did lots of research, and actually I must mention Doreen Hermitage in this, because Doreen sadly has passed away. And Doreen was one of the first people that I asked for help through the British Music Hall Society, and she was absolutely marvellous, pointing me in the right direction for obscure material, because we wanted to do a wide sweep of what both Marie Lloyd and Tilly were doing. So we didn't want to just sing the ordinary, normal songs. We wanted to give a wide range for the career. And also through Equity, who let me into their archives, bless them, so I could get hold of the 1906 music hall dispute, because there was a transcript of what Marie Lloyd had actually said.
Oh, that
so
was
that was
interesting.
so that was the start. You see, I did a degree in history as well, so it's combining history with my love of music. And there was as you know, there's a wide sweep in music hall, from the very lyrical to the point numbers. So it encompassed everything. And we got Michael Thomas, wonderful playwright, to put the whole thing together. So he wrote On the Halls for us, and it played in the West End. And we're now going to do a pared down version, because we want to take it to festivals around the country, with sort of a 3-woman show.
So Marie Lloyd, what is the fascination with her? It's quite interesting to sort of happen upon these people by accident. I know what that's like. I've done that myself. But you kind of get under the skin a little bit after a while, don't you? And there's so much with Marie Lloyd. What is it that actually appeals?
I think that she was a pioneer in her own right, and she was a woman in a man's world. She knew that she had to get on and do it. She loved performing. That was obviously her raison d'etre and why she went on for so long. She's a fascinating character in the fact that she was. Her personal life was extremely flawed as well. So she took risks that sometimes paid off and sometimes didn't. And I found myself doing that quite a lot. And sometimes the risks pay off and sometimes they don't. She was kind of disastrous in her private life. I think she found these dangerous men exciting and then it all backfired. And the one that she should have stayed with obviously bored her and she got rid of him. So... that's and the fascination from the way that her repertoire changed throughout her career as well.
She started very young, didn't she?
She did. She was 15. But she was really singing temperance songs since she was 10 because, she was in the local church and singing there. And she also put on little shows for her siblings, and included her siblings in the shows as well at home. So she really was starting performing from a very young age.
And when you say that the style of song changed, temperance songs are quite different from what she became known for when she was being banned by the Lord Chamberlain's office.
She was just very suggestive in what I suppose you can change a song in any way that you like, depending on the way that you sing it, because the words of a lot of the songs were very innocent, but it depends on the way that you interpret the lyric.
And is that something that you've had quite a lot of fun with whilst you've been performing?
Actually, reading through the lyrics again, I'm thinking, I've missed a few here. It's funny because I think one of my favourite songs is I'm a Good Girl Now. And you won't know this because she sang it just after the First World War. And she's talking about, I've been a WAF, I've been a wren, I've done my bit like all the men at driving cars, I'm not a dunce. At driving, I've been lucky, had a puncture only once. And that's true because she was only pregnant once. There's a line in that particular song, I'll carry on till I get carried off. And that's exactly what happened to her in her career. I'll carry on till I get carried off, because she literally collapsed on stage and died a couple of days later. Her husband, the number 3, who had been banned from going near her, had clattered her around the head. And she collapsed on stage and a couple of days later died.
Goodness. So she had a real track record in choosing unworthy men, didn't she? I mean, her taste.
She got pregnant. The first one, she got pregnant at a very young age with Percy Courtney, hence Marie Lloyd Jr. And I think she had a miscarriage shortly afterwards as well. So when people were ill in the theatre, it generally meant they were either having a baby or having a miscarriage. And she didn't have any children that we know of after that. She got divorced from Courtney because he started beating her up and he was drinking, and he was also betting on the horses. And incidentally, again, it was horse racing. Bernard Dillon, her third husband, was a champion jockey, Irish, and also a drinker and, by all accounts, a deserter as well during the First World War. So she had her fair share. And then husband number 2 was Alec Hurley, who was also a music hall star and a singer, and by all accounts, a really nice man.
And the other constant in her life, I suppose, was her manager, George Ware, who...
Yes. You want to bring up Georgie. Yes, okay. Yeah. Now, I think George Ware is a very clever cove indeed, because I know that you've been playing Nellie Power.
I have. I've got my own views on George.
Yeah. Now, George wrote the song, The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery. And first of all, he gave it to Nellie Power, and he was her agent as well. And I think that he knew what he was doing. I think he probably gave it to Marie Lloyd as well, because she was only 15 when she sang the song. And yes, she was a bit feisty, but I think that, she was probably manipulated, and he was probably on to, let's see who makes this song, work for me. And the bad thing about it really is that because the singers had to buy their songs, so I'm sure that Nelly bought the song from George first. So just looking at all the details, because George Belmont, first of all, was Marie's agent, and then she reneged on some sort of contract, but George Ware seemed to have been behind that as well, because he became her manager. So it all seems to just sort of looking between the lines, as if he was literally trying to back the winning horse. And he had rather a sort of a checkered career himself, because he was a singer who could sing in 3 different voice ranges.
Was he? I know, I never knew that.
Yeah, oh yeah. He could sing tenor, and he could sing bass, and also could sing alto. I think maybe it was just the timbre of the voice, because lots of people can sing sort of very high and very low, but they generally sort of settle in one tessitura. So from a technical point of view, I think he was out. It's a hard life, and they're out to make a living out of it, and it's not an easy business, as you know.
No, and he was obviously a sharp operator. So did he stay with Marie until the end of her career?
Percy Courtney was managing it for a while as well.
Yes.
So really, and then if she went to America, that would be arranged through the agents over there as well. So there were various different managers throughout her career.
Because she did a couple of tours of America, didn't she? And I've read that some of her material didn't go down terribly well because of the Cockney idiom.
I think they liked everybody to be nice and demure and sweet in America. They had sort of, I suppose, in a way, I mean, the West End of London preferred Marie Lloyd to the East End, because they wanted to be more upright in the East End. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but that's exactly the way it was. The material went down better in the West End. And the Americans they liked to go to the theatre. It was a genteel outing for the family. So her portrayal of some of her songs was not really what they wanted to see. Whereas Alice, her sister, went down really, really well.
Yeah. And that would explain why she was such a big hit in Paris, I suppose, because
Yes.
Moulin Rouge and all that, they would have loved her.
Oh, anything always went in France anyway.
And she was known, wasn't she, as the queen of the music halls. And I know that she had great wealth, and she died in relative poverty. And I've heard all these lovely stories actually about how generous she was.
She was, yes. I mean, very few people were going to stand up for music hall artists in 1906. And Marie Lloyd, I mean, some people were doing 3 turns a night and getting paid a pittance. So she gave away a lot of her earnings and was very generous. And when she died, I mean, the people just lined the streets. But she really didn't look to the future that much. I suppose you never knew where the next money was coming from anyway. But she was fairly secure up until, I would say, the end of the First World War. And then when Bernard started knocking her around, and her career was declining and not getting as many engagements. It's a tough one, really. I mean, you can squirrel away all your earnings and be on your own. But for her, I think she loved her audience. She would perform at the drop of a hat, and she liked people, and she liked helping people. She was a good sort.
Because of the name she had and the clout, for want of a better word, it was really admirable, I think, of her to get so involved in that music hall strike, because she didn't need to. She was earning the money, wasn't she?
Oh, absolutely, she was. I mean, she knew that if she didn't do something about it, that nobody would. And she paid the price of the music hall strike as well, because she didn't get invited to the first Royal Variety performance. Lester Tilly did. The managers all, she got a backlash from it, really, which was very sad. Which, you mean, goes to show that sometimes when you do stand up for people, you are going to pay the price for it.
And did Marie Junior go on to follow in mother's footsteps?
She was performing, I think, right into the 60s.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow. So and actually doing her mother's songs as well as her own.
Absolutely, yeah. I think she was more surviving on her mother's memory, from what I can glean. And I don't think she had any children either. She did get married, but I don't think she had any children.
So for the people who are listening, who, heaven forbid, don't know who Marie Lloyd was, they obviously now know a lot more about her. What would you say was sort of her most famous song?
Oh, goodness. Almost a Porter, probably. When I take my morning promenade, Twiggy Voo, there were so many.
And it's fascinating that there are so many that would have probably been really big famous songs then that haven't survived. As you were saying, they used to buy their songs and everyone was identified with the song, but lots of them just haven't stood the test of time, have they?
I mean, something like She Sits Among the Cabbages and Leeks. Meaning the vegetables, of course. But can be interpreted in many ways, was something that I found.
I love that story. I don't think it's true, but I love it. When someone complained about her sitting amongst the cabbages and leeks, she changed it to She Sits Amongst the Cabbages and Peas.
Yes, she had to have her ticket punched.
Yes. Oh, we could go on.
We could. But it was a way of sustaining your career. If you were no longer an ingenue, you had to have something else, and humour was one way to do this.
Absolutely.
And she had to be a supreme actress as well, because when you think about it, not everybody can time that sort of thing so well, and even with a look, to create that atmosphere in a hall. Because you listen to a recording and you think, well, what's funny about that? But if you actually see the performance, you can see what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. And some of those concert halls were huge as well, weren't they? And she'd be playing to, 2,000-3,000 people sometimes?
Yeah. So you had to throw your voice. You really had to throw your voice.
Gosh, no microphones.
No microphones after that sort of experience, because you're using the full force of your body to get the sound out. You have to be like an athlete, honestly. Somebody once said to me that being a performer was 10% talent and 90%, just perseverance.
Yes, I think so. With the sprinkling of stamina thrown in.
Absolutely.
So when you're actually playing Marie Lloyd, do you find that your gestures are bigger and everything you do is that little bit coarser in real life as well? Do you take her home with you?
I don't take her home with me. No, I don't take her home with me. She appears on the stage. She appears beforehand, just as I'm preparing for it. But if you take her around all the time, then it's not you. Otherwise, you don't become you. And I perform other things as well. So she's one facet of my performing career.
So she's kept in the box with the feather boas.
I'll tell you one thing, when I am performing, I lose weight. It's wonderful, because it's such stamina that they had to, endure, really. And when you think about it, we're lucky. We don't have to jump in a cab and go to 3 different music halls every single night and make sure that your turn is there for your 20 minutes and then you go off and you go somewhere else.
It was a hard life, wasn't it?
It was a very hard life. And if you caught a cold, it was very drafty changing in those places. They didn't have the medicines that we have today. Lots of people just, succumbed to colds and chests and all sorts of different illnesses. Particularly, I think TB was quite prevalent around, and bronchitis. A lot of the stars just died of, really.
Yes.
She was lucky she survived that long. But she did have a bit of a drink problem.
Oh, did she?
She liked her champagne, shall we say.
Well, don't we all, Marie? Don't we all? Good for her. I'm glad she kept the standards up. And
I'm
I
going
think,
to ask you a question now. I'm going to ask you about Nellie and Marie. Do you know if they ever performed on the same bill together?
do you know, I don't think they did, because they were almost a generation apart.
Yes.
They've certainly played at the same theatres, and they must have bumped into each other because they both lived near each other as well, so in the Islington area. So I doubt very much that their paths didn't cross, but I also doubt that they were best mates. Although there is a lovely story that, and again, who knows if it's true, I like to think it's true, that when Nellie got to hear about the song being half-inched, she did say, "Oh, just let her have it." So, which I'm not sure was because she was being generous or because she just couldn't be bothered to argue with someone who was 15 and probably lose out, because the young little innocent would win that fight every time, I think.
Because the other thing that I came across recently, because the other thing is during lockdown, I've been reading lots of detective stories, and I read one recently called The Adventures of Maud West, which was based on the true story of the real live detective who was actually in the same building as Belle Elmore, who also comes into the stories all around. And Belle Elmore was Mrs. Crippen, murdered by... Yes. So they all must have been around at the same time in the same area in Holborn. So it's all fascinating. I'm sure they all knew each other because it's a small world even today, but it would have been even smaller then. Everybody would have known everybody.
Yeah, and there is a quote that's attributed to Marie Lloyd, isn't there? I can't remember exactly what it is about Belle Elmore.
She says, "Let her in, boys, with her singing. She'll empty the theatre in no time."
And I do know for a fact that my Nellie performed with Vesta Tilley.
Yes.
And Vesta was Nellie's understudy. That's our claim to fame.
Vesta Tilley had a lot of female admirers and male admirers as well for her songs. I don't think Marie had particularly many female admirers, to be
No, I'm sure she didn't. Although if you look at the photos of her funeral, the 40,000 people who turned out, lots of them were women. So probably just making sure she'd gone.
or beneficiaries of her charities and things like that.
Yes, very possibly. Yeah.
Because, I mean, the big thing about the strike was they were saying that the managers were trying to sign the performers to restrictive contracts and then put them up from extra matinees without payment, would have resonated with, right through the country. So she did something very special there.
Oh, thank you so much, Marie. It's been an absolute pleasure. I do. Any chance to have a chat about Nellie is great, but the real background on the real Marie Lloyd, who isn't anywhere near as bad as I paint her, it's really nice to hear about. Quickly before we go, I know you're also involved in sort of running a youth theatre as well, aren't you?
Yes, I'm the artistic director of Dover Youth Theatre. Oh. We're working with the University of Kent, something we were meant to do earlier on this year, Gateways to the First World War. Their final lecture concert would have been about the poets of the First World War, Here Dead We Lie, and the students are going to record by Zoom some of the poetry, which is great. And that was actually going to be performed in public in front of a live audience in April, but we've had to postpone it, and hopefully we'll do it over the next couple of weeks once we get back in.
Oh, excellent. Well, keep us posted, and we'll hopefully, if it's going out online, we can send some links out for you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So welcome to our little podcast episode on Marie Lloyd, the wonderful Midge Gillies, who, to my mind, wrote the definitive biography on Marie, certainly where I got all my information from. But as well as knowing about Marie Lloyd, she's also written a biography of Amy Johnson, the female pilot, and teaches creative writing at the University of Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education. Now, Hello, Midge. Thank you so much for coming on. Now, you've obviously got a big interest in history, and in strong women as well, and pioneers. So what actually drew you to Marie Lloyd?
Well, a long time ago, I wanted to write about women and how women, I think, are funny in different ways. And that was the book I wanted to write. And when I started to do the research, I came across Marie Lloyd, and she'd only been a kind of very vague name in my head before then. And then doing the research and discovering what a huge star she was, how she'd been married 3 times, toured the world, been to America, South Africa, Australia, France, and had this huge zest for life and been quite naughty. I thought, what an amazing woman. And I love writing about women who do things that terrify me. Plus the fact that she did that without the kind of modern PA system that we'd be aware of today. And that she was quite a little person and performing to these huge halls just made me think, I need to know more about this person.
That is really interesting, because I know one of the first things that struck me about her was that she was tiny, but she was a real powerhouse, wasn't she? And in those halls at the time, if you didn't sort of grab everyone's attention within 20 seconds, then that was it. They would start throwing things. So she's incredible.
Yeah, and I think that I grew up watching the good old days on TV. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
And which kind of I liked because it was fun and you heard some nice songs. But I think it did a big service to the genuine music hall, because it was much tougher to try and perform in those kinds of environments. And you would go along and maybe play 5 or 6 halls a night. And in London, that meant tearing around in quite dangerous areas. So at a time when Jack the Ripper was on the prowl. So it was a really kind of threatening place for a young woman to be going to, although very exciting, I'm sure. And also at the time, there wouldn't have been electricity. So it would have been very kind of fusty and warm to perform on stage. So people would have been smoking. If they didn't like your act, then they'd throw things at you. In the worst case scenario, it'd be a dead cat, or it might be bottles or nuts. So a really kind of daunting thing to do. So that was one of the things that made me think she must have been quite a special person to enjoy doing that kind of performance.
Yes, and what do you think made her want to do it in the first place? Because it must have been a really daunting atmosphere to actually launch herself in, and she was so young when she started.
I think she was a born show-off. She used to take her sisters along, and they would pretend to be mourners at the graveside. So I think she just, was one of those people who was born into show business and loved the thrill of people looking at her and making people laugh. And she was a very warm person. So I think she kind of craved being in the limelight. And I think she was a genuine person. She liked to try and help people. There were always people waiting at the stage door when she came out, and she was notorious for being overly generous. So she earned a lot of money, but she gave a huge amount of money away. And I think she was, more so than other musical performers, she stayed true to her roots and never wanted to be in a higher class. So I think people loved her for that as well, because she was a kind of true East End woman.
And her whole act was based around that as well, really, wasn't it? It was that cheeky Cockney, call blimey, twinkle in the eye type thing.
Yeah, and she had lots of different types that she would play, and they changed, obviously, as she got older. So when she was a teenager in her early 20s, she was, her skirts were quite short, and she knew how to prance around the stage and be quite daring. And in the older playbills and song sheets, she does look very attractive in quite a saucy way. And then as she became more matronly, she adopted more of a kind of knowing act, and she was almost in cahoots with the audience. So she would, just by her famous wink or nod, would let on that we both knew what she was talking about. Those lyrics might look very clean on the page, but she was putting a lot of extra innuendo into them.
And she had a track record of bad choices with husbands, didn't she?
She did.
Yes. So do you think that was some kind of self-destruct button, or again the thrill of something that was a bit more exciting, and she would have been bored with someone not so inappropriate?
Well, I don't know. I mean, she got married for the first time when she was quite young, and because she was pregnant, and unfortunately, he was very violent towards her. So I think that was just kind of, a mistake of youth. Her second husband, Alec Hurley, was lovely, another musical performer, but perhaps she did want a kind of exciting life. And her third husband, Bernard Dillon, was a champion jockey and a lot younger than her. And they were actually went together to America. And she was quite open about the fact when the reporters met her by telling them that they said, well, we couldn't find your name. She said, oh, that's because, I was in the same room as Bernard Dillon. And she was held for moral turpitude because she was ahead of her time again and being quite open about enjoying that kind of physical side of life. And I think she lived life at a tearing pace, and she was always going to be on to the next person. And I think she wanted a certain person who was going to make her feel young, and that she was on the edge of things the whole time.
So definitely life in the fast lane for her.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you were saying she was generous, and I believe she ended up giving most of her money away, didn't she? By default, she wasn't wealthy when she died at all.
No, it was very sad because she was towards the end. She was struggling, and it was at a time, 1922, when musical was kind of waning slightly. So her star wasn't as high as it had been, but she had to keep performing because she needed the money, even though physically she was in quite poor shape. And if you look at photos of her costume and her act, when it turned out to be her final act, she just looks like she's in her 80s, and she wasn't. She was in her 50s, and she looks just terribly worn down and thin. And you think she shouldn't actually have been performing in that kind of physical state.
Oh, that's such a shame. And obviously she needed to, because there wasn't any choice, was there?
No.
And she, because of the type of act, she didn't transition into the movies, because I think at that time a few music hall turns were able to do that if their acts were more sort of physical. But I suppose the songs didn't work with the silent movies.
No, I can't see her doing anything other than the halls, really. And that was her bread and butter, what she knew. And also I think she kind of needed to be in the same room as her audience. So she fed off the way they responded to her. And obviously you don't get that if you're in a movie. So it was the wrong time for her. Perhaps if she'd been born a lot later, she would have been on TV, and she might have enjoyed that in a different way.
I can see her being the queen of social media, actually.
Yes.
She's around now.
Yes, posting things she shouldn't post too without thinking about it. Yes,
that's right. And front page of Hello magazine and that stuff. Yes. And did she actually make any records, or are there recordings of her?
Yes, there are a few, and actually I've got a CD with a collection of her songs, and the quality is not great, but it is lovely to hear her. And occasionally you can hear her speaking voice, which is really thrilling. So there's one where at the very end she says something like, last verse again, boys, or something, to the orchestra. And it's absolutely thrilling because suddenly she's a real person, because she didn't leave. I found 2 letters from her in a New York archive. But apart from that, she wasn't the kind of person who wrote diaries or letters, because she lived for the moment. So really her heritage is her songs, and the songs that were written for her. So I think you have to go back and really study the lyrics. And there are so many songs that she wrote, and they don't really stand the test of time, because we can't see the innuendo in them. And they were written for the kind of topics of the moment. So, she might be writing about a soldier in khaki, or it's funny, or there's one line, having your furlough cut short, which suddenly we understand. But
yes, that means something now.
Yeah.
Yes.
But to her, having your furlough cut short was something quite different again there. and about railways, which were very exciting at the time, and had the potential to be in a carriage with strangers. And we don't really understand, we've forgotten, unless we watch an old movie, what it was like to be on a train, and that you did have the potential to be in one of those little cabins with someone that you might suddenly have some interaction with, which might be quite exciting.
Yes, well, they used to have closing doors between the carriages and everything, didn't they?
Yes. Lots of potential there.
Yes, much potential for a new book, I think. It's a romantic novel.
Yes.
And talking of new books, is Marie going to feature in your latest? I think you're writing a biography of Piccadilly Circus, aren't you?
Yes, I am. So I've been looking for a new way to write about her, because it's been a time since I've written about her. So I'm writing a biography of Piccadilly Circus. So looking at the buildings there and the stories attracted to them. So I'm going to be writing about the pavilion, and she did perform at the pavilion. So it seems like a good excuse to shoehorn her in there and talk about things like why she wasn't invited to the first Royal Command performance, and about the music hall strike. So I think it's a good chance to maybe reintroduce her to people who haven't heard of her or have forgotten about her. So I'll be doing my best to write about her again.
Oh, that's super, because I think she really was a trailblazer, wasn't she? Especially with things like the music hall strike. She didn't need to get involved in that, but she did.
Yes. Yeah, I think she was in lots of ways. I mean, she wouldn't have understood the term feminist, or probably not cared for it really, but she was her own woman, and wasn't afraid to stand up and say things. So, other music hall performers would toe the line and hope to get into polite society that way. She wasn't bothered by that at all. So I love the fact that she was such a free spirit.
And do you think that was because she was so successful and she had sort of the clout to be able to do that, or do you think it's because she was just a free spirit and she would have said it all anyway and stood up for her rights and etc.?
I think she would have said it anyway, and she didn't really think ahead too much. So she was very spontaneous, and I think she kind of knew what was right, and just followed her heart a lot of the time, which could occasionally be disastrous. And she wasn't very good at kind of playing games with the bigger syndicates. And so, for example, she didn't do terribly well in the States because she didn't realise that it was a different audience. So, for example, her sister Alice was much more successful in the States than Marie was. And Marie's whole persona was about being a Londoner, and in the States, they didn't really understand that. They didn't understand what she was trying to do, and they were baffled by her innuendo. And again, when I was doing the research for the book, I saw lots of comments by the music hall syndicates talking about her and saying that she was a bit too strong in her language and in her approach to entertainment. So she was very much a kind of British phenomenon.
A bit sort of carry-on movies for an earlier generation.
Yeah, no, it's funny talking about her now, with the passing of Barbara Windsor, because they had a lot in common, really. And I think Marie was someone who everyone felt they knew personally. And when she died, about 100,000 people came to her funeral. And one woman walked all the way from Newmarket in Suffolk to see her passing in North London. And it reminded me of when Diana, Princess of Wales, died, and the funeral then, because the funeral processions passed one another. And I think that those women both had the same appeal. And when Marie died, the taps in the pubs in Leicester Square were draped in black, and people lined the streets to say goodbye to her. And there were huge floral tributes. So I think that she was someone who belonged to the people, really. She was really a one-off, I think.
And we're talking today, which is the day after the announcement that Dame Barbara Windsor has sadly left us. And she actually played Marie Lloyd on stage, didn't she?
Yes. And again, I think that was perfect, really, because of their kind of similar backgrounds and quite petite women as well, and a lot of, guts and not taking any nonsense. So I think she was, it's very fitting that she did play Marie.
Yeah, I agree. But both very generous and warm-hearted people as well. So,
yes, yeah.
I wish I'd seen that show, but there you are.
Yes. I suppose the other thing is about, she was a huge star, and it's quite interesting that her third husband, Bernard Dillon, was a champion jockey, and they were horse racing and musical are quite interesting worlds, because they're both worlds where you can make a lot of money and rise up the ranks if you come from quite a humble background. So from a kind of social history point of view, I think that's quite interesting.
And I think I might be wrong here, but I think they're both sort of fields where outsiders are welcome.
Yes, that's a good point. And a very kind of topsy-turvy world as well. So Marie would, do her performance and then not be able to be on such a high that she couldn't go to bed or get to sleep. And her husband, Bernard Dillon, was someone who, as a champion jockey, was an athlete, really. So he was very worried about not putting on weight. And she, just ate and drank as much as she wanted. And they did go to places like Romano's, the restaurant, together. And it was a place where you had different social classes mixing. And they were both, yes, as you say, I think, areas that would welcome all sorts of people, but also be very competitive as well.
Yes, and that's must have been quite interesting. I know he wasn't the best husband in the world by any means. And I wonder how much of that was down to unhealthy competition.
Yeah, and I'm not making any excuses for him, because he again was violent towards her, but it must have been quite difficult for someone at a time when women didn't really go out and perform, and if they did, they were often seen as being, the equivalent to a prostitute. So it must have been very difficult for him to be married to someone who was in the public eye and very successful, and at a time when his career was on the slide slightly as well. So those two big egos clashing together, I think, must have been, a disastrous recipe for a marriage, really.
Yes, absolutely. we do see it quite a lot. I think that's the other thing, isn't it? People in the public eye, it's a natural thing that they gravitate towards other people in the public eye.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that they do both understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think probably on both sides, their friends could see that it was not going to work. But neither of them were the sort of people that you could kind of take them to one side and say, I think you should reconsider this. So, they were quite impetuous, both of them.
So on that jolly note of strength and independence, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great chatting to you. I love learning more about all these people, and you kind of think you know stuff, and then you don't, do you? But
I think everyone is different depending on who is looking into their life. So there might be something I'm interested in, and I'm sure there are different aspects of Marie that appeal to you too. So that's part of her star quality, I think.
Yeah, part of her charm. And I would thoroughly recommend your book, which is, I get it out every so often just to have a little dip in, and then I think I'm just going to read a bit more of this, and I just do. So it's Marie Lloyd, the one and only, isn't it?
That's it. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so, and when is the Piccadilly Circus book coming out?
So I have to deliver the manuscript at the end of next year, so it'll be the following year, which is 2022, I think.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Quite a fashion card on the promenade. The white tent light, nice boy standing hard. If it satisfies his eye, do you think my dress is just a little bit? Well, not too much of it. Though it shows my shape just a little bit. That's the little bit eyes I
Thank you for listening to Famous People You've Never Heard of.
If you've enjoyed the podcast, please rate, review and subscribe so that other people can find us more easily and you'll never miss an episode. If you'd like to support our work, it's easy to do. Just go to www.patreon.com/Bluefire Theatre. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.